Start. Welcome back to this episode of the Customer Discovercast. I am here with Aaron Morris, who is the founder and CEO of Postera, machine learning powering drug discovery. Welcome, Aaron. How are we doing?
Thanks so much, Ethan. Real pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me on your show.
Absolutely, man. For those that don't know you, please introduce yourself, introduce your business, talk about your background, which is super interesting.
Yeah, of course. So I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Postera. As Ethan mentioned, the challenge that we are trying to address is how do you use modern technology like artificial intelligence and machine learning to improve the way that we discover new drugs. So specifically, Postera focuses on applying machine learning to medicinal chemistry, which is basically like the middle part of how you discover a drug. And we can definitely dive into that more. As for my background, so I'm a mathematician by training. I've loved maths as long as I can remember, and was actually very fortunate when I was studying in the UK at Oxford to meet one of my co-founders. Didn't know it at the time, but 7 years later, we would become co-founders. His name is Alpha. And after Oxford, I then went into investment banking and finance, actually, for 5 years, where I was applying machine learning to challenges in finance, and then started Postera back in October of 2019.
Wow. Okay. So that's a very robust background. Okay. So you're a mathematics major. How did you go? What were you doing back then? What was your day job before you started Postera?
Yeah, so I was working at Goldman where I was basically applying machine learning to the stock market. A specific area that I was interested in is how do we use big data to help us price what are known as block transactions, which is huge amounts of stock being sold at any given one time. So most people think of machine learning or quant in finance as doing thousands of trades a second, which are all quite small. Whereas I was doing one trade every couple of months that was really huge. So it was very much focused on the other side of the traditional low latency, high speed algorithmic trading that most people associate quantitative finance with.
Wow. How'd you like that, by the way? Because I just spoke with someone who was in something similar. He was on the high frequency side. He loved it. He loves numbers. I mean, he's now a machine learning engineer as well, but he speaks with people and he's like, man, the toughest part is like, if I were to talk about what I do with someone who, isn't like passionate about finance or numbers, their eyes just glaze over. And, like, how do you feel about that? Was that the case when he spoke to people about it, about what you do?
Well, actually, I think it's so important for anyone who is in a very technical or scientific domain to get really good at being able to take very complicated language and jargon and concepts and make them accessible. So actually, the people that I was working with at Goldman had absolutely zero finance background. My manager could barely discern the difference between an average and a median of a set of numbers. And so I actually enjoyed learning how to communicate super complex concepts like machine learning to people very much outside of that domain. And it's something I continue to try and do today. And so my encouragement, for anyone is don't get stuck in your bubble, learn how to communicate your science to people outside.
Are analogies your best friend? Metaphors and similes? Like, how do you best communicate complex things such as that?
Yeah, I reckon that absolutely analogies, metaphors are the best way, though imperfect, to try and make it accessible. And everyone loves a diagram. We're very visual learners as humans. Like we can make sense of images much better often than just pure text. So combining a few of those visual features with analogies, I guess goes some way to getting the problem conveyed and trying to do things in layers. So starting out with something that may not be entirely perfectly accurate, but at least is digestible and understandable, and then building complexity on top of it, rather than starting out with a set of equations start out with a very simple, imperfect analogy and build up to something more accurate but harder to understand.
Absolutely. Wow. So, okay, we covered your background, and it's a very, it's very hard to do what you were doing, both like getting into the position that you were at and then being there. So it must have taken something rather, purposeful, rather passionate, for you to say, okay, I'm done. I'm going to go, start Postera. I don't know if it was called Postera back then, but talk about that. Like, what caused you to kind of switch paths?
Yeah, I was actually very happy in my job. I had some fantastic colleagues at Goldman, a great social network. I was doing really cool machine learning stuff every day. But I think I got to a point, Ethan, where I was a little bit comfortable. I had become a little bit, I guess, predictable in my day to day. And I was looking for a way to almost disrupt myself. People talk about disrupting industries, but I think it's important you first learn how to disrupt yourself and how to get out of your comfort zone. And so for a long time, I had continued to communicate with Alpha, my friend at Oxford, and talk about his work. So he went to Harvard and then to Cambridge, where he was leading a research group applying machine learning to drug discovery, and these academic breakthroughs really got my attention. And I said, hey, maybe we can work together along with our other co-founder to begin to commercialize this technology, take it from an academic paper to something that actually is putting drugs, hopefully, into the clinic. So that was quite motivating for me. I think also there was a very clear social impact and social good that I felt I could contribute toward. And finally, I think in the spirit of disrupting oneself, also wanted to learn a new skill set. I think doing the very heavy mathematics, coding, machine learning for lots of years was fantastic, but I wanted the challenge of how do you run a company? How do you build a culture, manage a team, lay out a vision, execute a strategy? How do you do all these things that you don't learn in your textbook? And that was, again, part of the reason that I chose to kind of take the dive in the deep end.
Yeah. Wow. So now speak about kind of the early days of Postera, right? How did you guys kind of hash out, hey, there's a problem here. We have a solution to it. Here's how we're going to formulate everything. Forming a company is, like Elon Musk says, that's probably my favorite analogy. Speaking of analogies that he says, starting a company is like eating glass and staring into the abyss. So how was it like eating glass those first few months?
It's great if you've got an academic paper, but figuring out where does the market need my solution and how are you going to monetize that is a real challenge. So I think the thing that we did well was, rather than sitting in a room and theorizing, we actually just started going out to investors and just trying to pitch, just trying to get feedback from the market as to, do you like this idea? Have you seen other companies in this space? Are we any different to those companies?
Mm.
And that there's no better feedback than when people have to put their where their mouth is. So actually pitching to investors can be a really helpful way to figure out if you've got anything. Now, are investors perfect? No. Do they make mistakes? Yes. But I think we thought it to be better than just sitting around by ourselves. So we did a lot of pitching, Ethan, for the first 3 months. A lot of failed, unsuccessful pitches and a few successful ones. And so by the end of, so we started October 2019. By the end of the year, we'd kind of got maybe like half of the round. We wanted to raise like £1.5 million, so $2 million.
Mhm.
Kind of got halfway there, 3 months, real slog. And that's kind of when Y Combinator came in and broke apart our nice little plan. And that took us off in a different road.
Wow. So, two things. First thing is that you really did your customer discovery interviews, essentially like, is there a market for this? Are we a unique approach to it that would be beneficial to the market? And you really did your customer discovery interviews with investors, which is the first time I've heard that. But for a unique business in a unique niche like yours, biotech, correct? That's ultimately what you guys would be classified under, biotech companies. It's a lot different because it's not B2C, right? You don't necessarily go speak to consumers. You have to speak to domain experts because it's such a very refined area. So very interesting there, and it seems like it was rather successful. Like you said, it was a slog, but asking for people for hundreds of thousands of dollars, well, millions of dollars technically, is never a quick process, I'm sure.
Definitely not, no. And you're absolutely right. Of course, the customer always comes first, and you should always ask your customer. But you're in the biotech space. I mean, you can't just walk up to Pfizer and say, "Hey, can you give us some feedback on our idea?" So, investors were the kind of helpful compromise of accessibility versus truthfulness. And so, you're absolutely right. I think any new founders, as well as theorizing and thinking, you just want to get out there, speak to your customer ideally. And if you can't speak to your customer, speak to the domain experts. Yeah.
Absolutely. And step two, you said YC kind of interrupted your process. They reached out to you, didn't they?
They did, yes. We had heard of YC. Like, I don't think either of the three of us were particularly in the startup ecosystem. So all of the fantasies around YC and demo day, none of that had really reached us. We'd heard of YC. We knew it was kind of, the hot place to go. But really, we never envisaged going there. We never intended to apply. We were very happy saying, okay, we know London. We have a network in London. Let's build from here. But huge credit to YC. They really expanded outside of that traditional B2C and SaaS-based products and become very open-minded about welcoming biotech and life science into the YC community. And so one of the partners that they had installed reached out to us. He had read one of the papers published by our co-founders, Matt and Alpha, from Cambridge, and said, "Hey, have you thought about turning this into a company? It looks promising." And we were like, "Oh yeah, 2 months ago, we actually incorporated a company. It's called Postera." And
So
long
perfect
story
timing.
short,
Yeah.
we then ended up at YC in the start of 2020. Yes, January 6th, 2020, landed in Silicon Valley. We took like a pre-seed round from London, but we shut down most of the round after we got in YC.
So speak about that now. So you fly out to Mountain View, right? You had been to America before?
Yeah, I actually I have family members living in Florida, and I've been around certain states, but
Okay.
not well traveled.
I was going to say, because my question is, I know that the startup ecosphere is global, of course, but I've just heard from many people that are global entrepreneurs that just in Silicon Valley is just like a fantasy land of venture capital and startups. Like, what was your experience going from the London, just raising, right? Like in the midst of everything, raising with investors to go into YC and like, I don't want to say people throwing money at you, but what was the difference? Like, what did it feel like a entirely different world?
Well, I think the first thing was before anyone threw money at us, there was a lot of work to be done in the first place, and the YC program rigorously enforces a couple of very helpful philosophies, and that guided the way that we began doing business. So we landed in Mountain View. We maybe had 1 or 2 meetings a week with our YC partners, but the majority of the time was the three co-founders. We just lived in an Airbnb close by. I mean, literally slept next to each other, ate together, 18 hours a day, just like
Best
worked. I mean,
friends.
it was intense.
Yeah.
The fact that we didn't kill each other is amazing. But
Those are your friends.
we,
Those were your friends before. Now they're they're like brothers, I bet.
I mean, yeah, you get to know people very well when you're living, working, sleeping, like all in the same vicinity.
Wow.
So, yeah, we work super hard to try and make progress because it's one thing releasing an app and trying to get users to demonstrate traction to investors. It's another thing in the same time frame to try and convince a pharma company to even have a conversation with you to try and demonstrate some level of traction. Like, you're not going to make a drug in 3 months. So the traction looks very different from the life scientist and biotech perspective, but we had some goals, we had some milestones, and we worked toward them. And then Demo Day came along, which was the kind of culmination where you pitch your company to thousands of investors. I think YC have this amazing network, and it was all going great. And then COVID turned up, which meant that 2 days before demo day, lockdowns occurred, and demo day in person was cancelled. And there was a lot of panic. There was a lot of uncertainty around that time. And again, the YC leaders did an amazing job. They spun up a virtual online demo day where we were given basically just a PowerPoint slide, one PowerPoint slide. That's all you had. And you just posted it on the website, and investors looked at it. And if they liked it, they reached out to you. And that was our demo day.
Wow. Yeah. And how, okay. So the first virtual demo day, and a little birdie has told me that forever now demo day will be virtual. So how was it like for the very first virtual demo day? Like, was it tough, or you said they did a great job? How'd it go?
It went really, really well, Ethan. Yeah, but I think we were quite nervous. I mean, I love an audience. I love speaking to people. I'll be able to read the expression, the response, and so
Yeah.
with that gone, you're really just relying on this PowerPoint slide. And so we had no idea. Remember, the markets are crashing like 20% a day at the minute. We had no idea if there was even sufficient liquidity in Silicon Valley to show any interest in new
Yeah.
startups.
Wow.
So we had no idea if anyone would show at all. So we were thinking, do we need to shift back to London? Do we need to put the company on pause? Long story short, COVID became probably the best thing that could have happened to Postera. We were able
Really?
to raise well over $2 million in about 5 days. And so it turned out to be fantastic for us. We had about 45, I think 43 or 45 Zoom pitches in the space of 5 days. It was like 9 or 10 per day, back to back.
How much
Never
coffee did
advise
you
it.
drink in that time period?
Those days left a permanent scar, but it was it got wrapped up very quickly. So yeah, we were very fortunate. We managed to close the round within a week. But yeah, COVID was a real tailwind for us because of what we were doing.
Wow. Well, congratulations, because you guys navigated an unforeseeable storm that no one has ever seen before, and no one knew how to navigate, right? Because like we didn't know how long it would last either. I remember back then there was people saying like, "Oh, it'll last like 2 or 3 months, and then we're good to go. Everything's back to normal." Nope, not quite. It's a year past and it's still going on. So congratulations on weathering the storm very gracefully, right? Because you guys have really I don't want to say capitalized, because that almost sounds like it doesn't quite grace what you guys were actually able to do.
Yeah, I think just for anyone who is listening, we actually launched a COVID initiative, which has become called COVID Moonshot. And
Exactly.
our idea was that we could crowdsource drug ideas from scientists around the world. So we basically went on Twitter and found some experimental data that had been released from Oxford in the UK. We then put it up on a website and basically said, hey, does anyone want to take this data and work with us to turn it into a drug? I mean, like, our company was 6 months old. We barely had a website. And so I think we expected 50, maybe 100 submissions from scientists who got hold of our website. We ended up with well over 16,000. And
Jeez.
that really kind of like was the start of this COVID Moonshot initiative, which has gone from that preliminary website with some experimental data from Twitter to actual drugs that are now being tested in animals and preparing for human trials. So,
Wow.
this will be the first time that a drug has kind of been crowdsourced from scratch. And like the end of Y Combinator was the genesis of this COVID moonshot. And I think that certainly helped when it came to investors.
Wow. So that's very exciting, right? Because you're really like that epitomizes kind of the stage of humanity we're in, where you can crowdfund something like that because distribution is so high, right? So what is the status of that? I know you said like that was a couple months ago, but they're in human trials. When does it move into, or sorry, we're in animal trials. When do they move into human trials?
So the process of going from animal trials to human trials can be up to a year. And so we are kind of pretty confident that we are going to be able to like declare what's called a candidate. So hey, I've got this. You can't necessarily call it a drug, but just for the sake of simplicity, I've got this drug and it ticks all the right boxes to go into human trials. So we're hoping to get that by the end of the year. There's still quite a bit of process we've got to go through in terms of regulatory filings. It's not a 1 week job to put a drug into a human, thankfully,
Right.
but it also means it's quite slow. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's just been a remarkable effort. And the really good news is that all of the experimental data that's been generated over the last year is available, publicly disclosed on our website, which means when the next pandemic, sadly, inevitably will come around, the world should be on a much stronger foot to be able to respond to the pandemic because of this huge wealth of experimental data that's been generated. The coronavirus, that is the parent of SARS-CoV-2, actually is pretty kind of similar. When SARS-CoV-1 came out, SARS-CoV-2 is different, but it's not that much different. And so hopefully if we can find a cure for SARS-CoV-2, there should be a good chance that it's applicable to any future strains of coronavirus as well. So, this is not just about can we help fix this pandemic, it's can we put the world in a good place to solve the next pandemic.
Wow. So you're really setting up the infrastructure for preventative measures for future pandemics. That's incredible. I so because I'm not too familiar with this technology and these processes. uh, I know I may sound stupid when I ask this question. Does this replace kind of that Pfizer and Moderna and Johnson & Johnson vaccine? Is this a new approach to solving COVID? Like, can you explain that?
Sure. So this is very complementary. So Johnson Johnson, AZ, AstraZeneca, sorry, and Pfizer BioNTech, Moderna have all developed vaccines. Now, a
Okay.
vaccine is really, really important if you want to prevent someone from getting infected.
Okay.
It basically provides a mechanism by which the body can anticipate a response to a real threat. However, if you are already sick, if you have already contracted COVID, a vaccine is unlikely to be of any use to you. The infection, the disease is already, the virus is already in your system. What you need at that point is something that can actually kill the virus, and that is an antiviral. So an antiviral basically fixes things if you're already sick. A vaccine stops you getting sick in the first place, and you really need both to really combat this pandemic. And one of the reasons is because the vaccine, as amazing as it is, the scientific breakthrough, it is still going to be well past 2023, even into 2024, until developing nations can get access to
Mm,
these vaccines. And so how are you going to help these nations in the meantime? Well, a cheap oral pill that you can take is a really, really good way to kind of mitigate the problems of COVID until you can get the vaccine. And that's our hope.
wow. Yeah. Wow. It's incredible because, I normally we never think about things like that, but you guys are really ahead of the curve there. And did you mention the timeline? I know you said, it's definitely, it takes a couple months to happen. Did you say 2022?
That we have no idea when it will actually be on the shelf. We're just moving as fast as we can. Right now, I think the only thing I'd feel comfortable saying is we're aiming for, ready for human trials by the end of this year. And it's then
Awesome.
just down to regulators as to how fast we can go through that process.
Okay. Wow. Awesome. Awesome. So now we're really talking about present day and talking about kind of the next steps for Postera. Is there anything that people need to know so that they can stay in touch with Postera, and do you guys take feedback? I don't know. How can like scientists get in touch with you guys?
Yeah, we basically, outside of COVID Moonshot, which is a total non-profit initiative, consortium, whatever you want to call it, outside of COVID Moonshot, we do have obviously a set of collaborations. So if you are a drug hunter, if you are developing a drug, Postera can help you. We do that in the form of partnerships where we work with you to basically take your very, very early development process and hopefully with machine learning expedite that very quickly. We also do have a Saas product which fixes a very important but smaller slice of drug discovery, which is how do I make molecules? So this is a process known as chemical synthesis. And we've basically taken a portion of our machine learning and made that available. There's so many new biotechs springing up around the world now, and being able to put machine learning into their hands is also really important for us. So you can engage with Postera both via a partnership, let's develop a drug together, or you can access some of our software, which is sat on our website, and it's called Manifold.
Manifold. Okay, gotcha. So that's all on your website. Wow. I mean, that's amazing. Can you, so machine learning and drug science and drug discovery, speak a little bit more on that. I know we have to wrap up here, but kind of the, the final tidbit here. How do you guys use machine learning to help with drug discovery?
Yeah, so I guess you can think about drug discovery as starting off with a biology problem, which is what do I want to tackle in the human body? What protein or enzyme or what
Right.
gene am I aiming for to modulate or to upregulate? Once you've fixed the aim of biology, it then becomes a chemistry problem of how do I develop a drug that can generate the type of biological response that I want? And after the chemistry, the medical problem of what patients do I need to recruit? What type of dosage do I administer, etc.
Mm,
Postera focuses squarely on the chemistry part, the middle part.
okay.
And that middle part is basically a kind of three-step process of designing molecules, making molecules, and then testing them. And then feedback, design, make, and test. And a human intuition, trial and error approach. We bring machine learning to the table to move toward industrializing, automating the process. It's very challenging. There are many things that humans still outperform algorithms on, but there are many things that algorithms are increasingly being able to outperform humans on. We that technology to help you figure out what molecules should you make, how exactly should you make them, and what are the likely properties of those molecules that you're making. And we can help answer questions.
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible. And, I want to give you the chance. We do have to wrap up. It's been an absolute honor to have you on the show. Aaron, tell people, I know you've covered kind of how they could partner with you on the website. Can they stay in touch with you on Twitter? Do you have a business email? How can they get in touch with you or stay in, you don't have to give out like personal emails or anything, by the way, but
No is, I mean, if you go on our website, there's just a very simple, hello@postera.ai. You can follow me on LinkedIn or Twitter. We actually put a lot of updates about Postera on those social media platforms. I think that's probably the best way.
awesome. Well, Aaron, thank you so much for joining. It's been an absolute honor.
Thank you, Ethan. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.